everyone, hope you're doing well. It's been a wee while since my last video, which was me talking about what I was most looking forward to at Frightfest. So now that it's all over for another year, I thought it would make sense to check in and give an overview of my top 5 films of the festival. So it was my first London Frightfest and it was great. I had a fantastic time. Seen some really incredible films, met some really amazing people, and overall, despite the fact that I was living on very little sleep and quite a lot of alcohol, I managed to survive and had a great time. You might be able to tell from my voice a little bit, I'm not entirely recovered yet. I wasn't feeling too well on the way home and I have been quite ill the past few days, but tests have confirmed it's not COVID, so anyone that was with me doesn't need to worry. It looks like it's just regular festival flu. So over the course of the weekend, along with the digital festival which ran online afterwards, I managed to catch loads of films, and my top 5 have changed ever so slightly, primarily because of something I missed at the main festival. So in no particular order, my top 5 films of Frightfest 2021. So the first film on my list is Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes. Now this was actually the only film that I managed to catch on the Discovery screens. For the rest of the time I was entirely in the main screen, although I did hear there were some other great films that I really hope I'll be able to catch up on. Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes is a quirky, quite low budget sci-fi film from Japan. The story itself is pretty simple. There's a guy who runs a cafe and he finds out that he is able to see into the future via a TV in his cafe, but only for very specifically 2 minutes into the future. So for such a simple storyline, and this is probably saying more about me than it is saying anything about the film, I did find initially I was trying really hard to kind of keep track of what was actually going in terms of the logic of the time loop that we find ourselves in here. If anyone's ever seen Primer, it was like a cuter version of that for me, in that I found myself trying to understand what exactly was going on and trying to find my ground in the time loop. But once you sort of just let go and enjoy what's playing out, it's really fun. I think one thing about Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes is, even if it's not really your kind of thing, you really should watch it just to appreciate it, because how everyone involved in this film actually brought it to life just completely blows my mind. The work that must have been involved in the script and actually putting everything together, not to mention at the very end there's the reveal that actually this whole thing was shot on an iPhone, and it's all done in one continuous take. The effort and the skill that's involved completely overshines any kind of issues you might have with the film. And beyond that, it is just very cute. The cast are all very likeable, it's really quite funny at times, and it was a really good film to see in an audience. So the next film on my top list is a French-Belgian film that actually I didn't really have a lot of hope for initially, to be honest. It's called The Advent Calendar, and it very much sounds like your typical cheesy, tacky Christmas horror film. You're not going to find any killer Santas or reindeers here though. This is actually a lot darker and a lot more meaning to it than I thought there would be. So the Advent Calendar focuses on Eva, who is an ex-dancer, and she's currently in a wheelchair as a result of an accident that left her paraplegic. The story begins when her friend brings her an old wooden advent calendar that she's picked up in Germany for her birthday. So behind each door of the advent calendar there are candies, but also rules that Eva has to follow. Obviously the central character is disabled in this instance, but the film really put emphasis on that in a way that we're not really used to in kind of mainstream media, so it really placed focus on how Eva navigates the world as a disabled woman. So the film focuses quite heavily on Eva and her mental state, how she's kind of got to where she is and how she's interacting with the world that she finds herself in. So there's a lot more at stake than you would initially think on the surface of this film, I think, and actually there's a lot more connection to the characters than I was anticipating. The Advent Calendar is also made even better by the really strong performances of the cast in it. And as I say, at times it can be really quite poignant and emotional, which sort of knocks you off balance because you're not really expecting that to happen, but which is one of the things I just love so much about modern horror. If you're not really into kind of Christmas horror, I wouldn't let that put you off, because it definitely feels very different from a lot that I've seen before. Now, the advent calendar is coming to Shudder. I'm not entirely sure when, but it is coming to Shudder, so I would really recommend you check it out when it does hit. So the next film on my list, I am gutted about missing actually in person on the screen. That's just what happens. I'm not good at getting up early in the morning, especially when there's been wine the night before, so the first film is always a little bit touch and go. So even before I got to Frightfest, this was probably quite near the top of my list. It sounded very much like a good one, and everyone raved about it afterwards, so I knew that I had to catch this when it hit the digital edition. This is, of course, King Knight by Richard Bates Jr. So I haven't actually caught any of his previous films, which I'm definitely going to rectify as soon as possible, because if they're anything like King Knight, I know for a fact I will love them. This film was fantastic. So King Knight isn't strictly a horror, it's probably more of a sort of offbeat comedy, and it tells the story of Californian coven couple Matthew Gray Gubler and his wife Angela Serafian. King Knight works really well because it doesn't take itself too seriously at all. There's some really funny dialogue in it, and on top of that it just looks great. So visually it's very pretty, and also that's backed up by some really great kind of electronic synth music throughout. The film itself is probably quite hard to describe. It is really bizarre, but that's one of the things that makes it work so well. And actually the dialogue and the relationships and interactions between all the cast and characters really kind of glues it together and makes it overall a really sweet, heartwarming film. So the next film on my list kind of came out of left field a little bit for me. I wasn't expecting to love it quite as much as I did, but this generally seems to be the overall consensus from speaking to people. So you think Kazakhstan, you would be forgiven for not immediately thinking great filmmaking and horror. I think certainly in the UK the most notable thing to come from Kazakhstan in recent years is Sacha Baron Cohen's Borat. So I wasn't really sure what to expect of Sweetie You Won't Believe It going in, but coming out I bloody loved it. It's a very over-the-top, gore-filled comedy, but that's what makes it absolutely fantastic. So the story follows a man and his friends who are going on a fishing trip shortly before one of their wives is about to give birth. From the very get-go, everything's ridiculous. It's very slapstick at points, but it never feels forced. People were literally laughing out loud in the screen, and it's definitely a really great film to catch in an audience. I'm very glad that I did. So even though this film was really silly, the script was really well done, and actually the comedic timing worked so well, and I think that's one of the reasons it made this film such a hit of the festival. Even though there was, of course, excessive gore and blood, which most of us love, let's be honest, the effects were actually really pretty cool. It didn't feel like they skimped at all, and some of it was pretty intense at points, which I think made it work even more on a kind of different level, because you didn't really know whether to be freaked out or laugh, or both, and that's sometimes the best way to be in a horror film. If you're interested in hearing any more about this film, there is a review on lovehorror.co.uk by the lovely Lucy. I really recommend you check it out. It's a really interesting, really great review, and she can put it into so much better words than I can about how great this film is. So although I did say that I was going to be going through this list in no particular order, I have of course saved the best for last. Now, had you asked me before I went to the festival what I thought my top films would be, this probably wouldn't be anywhere near the top, which is one thing I just love about Fright Fest so much. You don't know what you're going to come away with. You don't know what anything is going to be like. And even when you think you do, you really don't. And Ultrasound was the perfect example of this for me. On paper, to be honest, I didn't really fancy this at all. And then I watched the trailer and I thought, okay, I'm kind of intrigued here. This could be interesting. But actually, Ultrasound pretty much blew me away. So this film is a kind of psychological mystery film, and you don't really know what's going on for the vast majority of the film, to be honest. I can't really say too much about the plot without giving an awful lot away. And also, I don't even know if I could say a lot about the plot if I wanted to. It follows Vincent Kartheiser, who plays a young man called Glenn. Now Glenn is coming back from a friend's wedding, driving home when he drives through some nails on the road and his car skids off. So he's stranded in the middle of nowhere, pouring rain, and he seeks refuge in the house of a nice young married couple. Now ultrasound really does keep you guessing throughout the entirety. Just when you think you have it, it starts pulling on other threads and everything completely twists upside down. What I would say though is it's absolutely worth sticking with it, even if you're sitting for the vast majority of it thinking I have no fucking idea what is going on, because it absolutely pays off at the end. Along with the really interesting script and really powerful storytelling, there's some really good performances in here. So all the lead cast really kind of blew me away, especially the different levels that they're playing this at. And actually, I definitely think it's the kind of film that you would probably benefit from seeing twice, maybe even a third time. I think there's a lot to unpick here. And it's really interesting to reflect on because it does say a lot about kind of abuse of power in different atmospheres and settings, exploitation of people. I just found it really fascinating overall. So that was my top 5 films from Frightfest 2021. Now I have had a look on social media and it's really varied as to what people like the most. There's obviously films that I haven't managed to catch that people are really recommending. And one thing that I loved so much about Frightfest was being able to come out of a screening and just grab a beer and just talk to someone about what they'd just seen, see what they loved about it, see what they hated about it, and also get recommendations for other things to watch. So I have already said this, but my list of films to watch is bloody huge, and it's just got even bigger after speaking to so many people about film over the weekend, but I wouldn't have it any other way. So what I would say, I would really love to chat more about either the films I've mentioned, or if there's any films that you think I might like or I should check out, please do get in touch. I would love to speak to other people that have either been at the festival or are interested in some of these films that were featured. As someone who's used to Glasgow Fright Fest, which is definitely a lot smaller, it was a very intense time, but it was great despite all the initial anxiety. It was lovely to meet everyone that I did meet, and hopefully I will see you all again in the not so distant future. Very much hoping to see if I can make it to the Halloween Fright Fest event and possibly Celluloid, we will see. Thanks very much though for tuning in and listening to my video. If there is anything you want to talk about or ask, just drop me a line on either social media or in the comments box. I really appreciate everyone that's taken the time to watch these daft videos so far, but thanks very much guys. Mwah.